The guards didn't see him come in. A small barefoot boy slipped through the gap in the hedge, quiet as the wind. His belly was empty, his clothes were torn, and his feet carried the dust of the streets. But when he saw her, the little girl in the wheelchair, staring at nothing, he forgot his hunger. Something in her silence pulled at him. So he did the only thing he knew how to do. He began to dance. Not for money. Not for food. But just to make her smile. Mr. Daniel Brooks, one of the richest men in the city, had no idea that a miracle was unfolding right outside his window. Inside his Banana Island mansion, silence had become his constant companion. Since the accident that killed his wife and paralyzed his daughter, Mia, laughter had disappeared from his home. He had everything: jets, cars, companies, but not the one thing his money couldn't buy: his daughter's smile. 8-year-old Mia once filled their home with music. She ran through the gardens chasing butterflies, laughed at every joke, and hugged her father every morning before he left for work. But after the crash, she spoke little and smiled even less. She would sit by the window in her wheelchair, watching the world move while she stayed still. Daniel tried everything. He took her to India for surgery, to Germany for therapy, to America for advanced treatment. He paid for machines, doctors, and specialists. Each trip ended the same: no change. Her body remained weak, and her eyes stayed empty. Now, his house was quiet. The laughter that once made the walls come alive had died long ago. Until that afternoon. Mia was in the garden, her nanny beside her, reading quietly. The sun burned high above, painting gold on the mansion's marble steps. Then, something moved near the hedge. A boy. He was no older than 10. Thin, barefoot, his shirt torn at the shoulder. He looked around quickly, then stepped onto the grass. His eyes met Mia's. And for a moment, neither of them moved. Then he smiled. And started dancing. His steps were clumsy, his spins too fast, and his face was full of funny expressions. He moved like a clown who had never gone to school but had learned joy from hardship. At first, Mia just watched. Her lips twitched slightly. Then, when the boy pretended to slip and fall, she burst out laughing. A full, real laugh. The nanny gasped. She hadn't heard that sound in almost a year. Mia clapped her hands. "Do it again," she said, giggling. The boy grinned wide and danced even harder, spinning, kicking, and hopping like the world's smallest performer. Each laugh from Mia made him move faster. He wasn't just dancing, he was alive again. For the first time in a long while, Mia was alive too. From the balcony, Daniel froze. That sound, laughter, echoed up like a memory. He rushed to the railing and looked down. His daughter was laughing, clapping, eyes bright again. And the person bringing her joy was a barefoot boy from the street. Daniel's first reaction was anger. How did this street boy get past security? Was he a thief? But then he saw Mia's face. Her cheeks were pink, her back straight, her voice strong. He saw life returning to her body. And for the first time in years, Daniel didn't know what to do, shout at the boy or thank him. He stayed hidden, watching. The dance went on for nearly 10 minutes. The boy finished with a dramatic bow, and Mia clapped so hard she almost cried from laughter. When he left through the hedge, Daniel whispered to himself, "Who is that boy?" That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He kept hearing Mia's laughter in his mind. He hadn't heard that sound since his wife died. He walked to her room, peeking in quietly. She was asleep, a tiny smile on her lips. Her hands still rested in the air, as if clapping in her dreams. Daniel sat by the window, staring out into the dark garden. Somewhere out there, a barefoot boy had brought back something his billions couldn't: joy. And deep inside, Daniel felt something stirring. Hope. The next afternoon, the mansion waited in silence again, the kind of silence that holds its breath before something beautiful happens. Mia sat in her wheelchair near the gate, her eyes fixed on the hedge. She didn't know why she expected him to come back. Maybe it was the memory of how his silly dance made her forget her pain. Maybe it was because, for the first time in so long, she had felt alive. Then she saw movement. A small figure slipped quietly through the hedge. Barefoot. Grinning. Covered in dust, but glowing with life. "Kofi!" she shouted, her voice bright and clear. The boy froze. He hadn't expected her to remember his name. He smiled shyly and raised his hand. "Are you ready for today's show?" he asked, pretending to stretch like a famous dancer about to perform. Mia laughed so hard her nanny had to steady her wheelchair. But before Kofi could begin, a deep voice broke the moment. "Stop right there." Kofi turned slowly. Daniel Brooks stood at the edge of the garden. Tall, serious, and dressed in white. The sunlight hit his face, making his expression unreadable. For a second, Kofi's heart stopped. He knew that look, the kind that often came before being chased away or beaten for trespassing. His bare toes dug into the grass as he prepared to run. But then Mia spoke, her small voice trembling. "Daddy, please don't send him away." Daniel looked from his daughter to the barefoot boy, studying every detail, the torn shirt, the tired eyes, the bruised knees. The boy stood still, holding his breath. "What's your name?" Daniel asked finally. "Kofi, sir." "Why did you come into my home?" Kofi hesitated, his voice soft but steady. "I saw her sitting here, she looked sad. I thought maybe if I danced she would laugh. I didn't come to take anything. I only came to give something small." His words were simple, but they hit Daniel deep in the chest. He looked at his daughter again. Her cheeks glowed pink. Her eyes were alive. Brighter than he'd seen in months. Her hands trembled, not with weakness, but excitement. Daniel sighed. Then, for the first time in a long while, he smiled. "All right," he said slowly. "You can stay for a while. But only here in the garden. No mischief, understand?" Kofi nodded quickly, his grin returning. Mia clapped. "Yay! Show time!" Daniel stepped back, folding his arms, pretending not to watch, but his eyes never left them. Kofi began to dance. His movements were playful, full of rhythm and freedom. He hopped, spun, and made funny faces. Mia laughed until tears rolled down her cheeks. Daniel watched quietly from the veranda. He had hired the best doctors, paid for the best machines, but none of them had brought back her laughter. This barefoot boy had done it in minutes. Something stirred inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. When evening came, Daniel called for the guards. "Let that boy in every day at 4 o'clock. He can stay until 6. Feed him before he leaves." The guards looked at him, surprised. "Yes, sir." From that day on, the mansion gates opened for Kofi each afternoon. He came faithfully, sometimes hungry, sometimes tired, but always ready to dance. He danced like it was his purpose. He danced like joy itself was his job. Mia waited for him every day, dressed and ready before 4. She would clap and laugh and tell him stories, and Kofi would tell her about the streets, the drivers who shouted, the fruit sellers who joked, the boys who played football barefoot on hot asphalt. He made her world bigger again. Over time, something began to change. Mia's hands grew stronger from clapping. She learned to move her arms to copy his moves. One afternoon, she even spun her wheelchair in small circles as he danced, giggling uncontrollably. The house staff noticed. The nanny whispered in disbelief, "She's improving, look at her arms." Even the family doctor, during a checkup, said softly, "This is remarkable. Mr. Brooks. Her spirit has returned." Sometimes, healing begins with happiness. Daniel nodded, emotion tightening his throat. He looked at Kofi, who stood quietly at the garden's edge, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Thank you, boy," Daniel whispered under his breath. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He stood by his study window, looking down at the dark garden. The air was quiet now, but his heart was full. He remembered how Kofi's dance had made his daughter's laughter echo through the house, a sound he thought he'd lost forever. He whispered to himself, "That boy did what all my money could not." And for the first time, Daniel Brooks, the billionaire everyone feared and respected, knelt beside his bed and prayed. Not for success, not for more wealth, but for the little barefoot boy who had brought light back into his daughter's life. The next morning, Mia surprised everyone. She called out from the garden, "Daddy, look!" Daniel rushed out, and there she was, holding the arms of her wheelchair, trying to lift herself slightly. Her elbows trembled, her shoulders strained, but she did it. She rose just an inch. Then she laughed. "Did you see that? I moved!" Daniel's eyes filled with tears. He knelt beside her and kissed her forehead. "I saw, sweetheart. You're so brave." Mia grinned. "Kofi says I can do anything if I laugh while I try." Daniel laughed softly, brushing her hair. "Then we'll laugh every day, my girl." That night, Daniel stood again by the window, the same spot where he'd once watched his daughter's silence. Now, he listened to her laughter floating through the halls. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Whoever you are, Kofi, you've changed everything." And somewhere under the city's bridge, where Kofi slept that night, a cool wind blew gently, as if the universe itself was whispering back, "You're not invisible anymore." For the first time in years, the Brooks mansion no longer felt cold. There was laughter again. Every afternoon at exactly 4, the gate opened for Kofi, the barefoot boy whose dance had brought life back to the house. The guards, who once stared at him suspiciously, now greeted him with smiles. The cook always kept an extra plate of food ready. Even the flowers in the garden seemed to bloom brighter when he was around. But the biggest change was in Mia. She was no longer the quiet, lonely girl who stared out the window in silence. Every day she laughed. Every day she moved. Every day she grew stronger. One warm morning, Kofi arrived early. He found Mia already waiting in the garden, her hair tied in 2 small buns, her face glowing with excitement. "You're early today," she teased, smiling. "I didn't want to be late." Kofi grinned. "You're my best audience." Mia laughed and clapped her hands. "Then let the show begin." He bowed dramatically, picked up a fallen leaf, and placed it on his head like a crown. Then he started his dance, spinning, hopping, and pretending to trip in the funniest ways. Mia laughed so hard her wheelchair shook. "You're so silly, Kofi." "I'm not silly," he said between moves. "I'm a professional happiness maker." From the veranda, Daniel watched quietly, his arms folded. His lips curved into a smile, something rare and soft. He hadn't realized how much he missed that sound. His daughter's laughter. It was no longer faint or forced. It was loud, pure, full of light. That evening, after dinner, Daniel called Kofi into the garden. The air was calm, and the lamps glowed softly between the flowers. "Kofi," Daniel said, sitting on a bench. "Come, sit with me." Kofi hesitated, unsure what he had done wrong. He sat down slowly, glancing up at Daniel's serious face. "You don't have to dance tonight," Daniel said gently. "I just want to talk." Kofi relaxed a little. "Yes, sir." Daniel studied him for a moment. The boy's thin frame, his bare feet, his tired but bright eyes. "Tell me," he said, "where do you live?" Kofi looked down at his hands. I don't have a place, sir. I sleep under the bridge sometimes. Or near the bus park." Daniel's heart ached. "And your parents?" "My mother died when I was small. My father—" Kofi paused. "I don't remember him much." There was silence. The only sound was the chirping of crickets. Daniel leaned forward. "How did you learn to dance?" Kofi smiled faintly. "When I'm hungry, I dance. It helps me forget the hunger. When I dance, people smile. Sometimes they give me coins. Sometimes they don't. But when they smile, I feel alive." Daniel sat back slowly, eyes glistening. Here was a child who had nothing, no home, no food, no family, and yet had found a way to make others happy. He whispered softly, "You've done for my daughter what all my money could not." Kofi frowned slightly. "Sir?" Daniel looked at him with a gentle smile. "You've given her joy. And that makes you part of this family now." Kofi blinked in shock. "Me? Family?" "Yes," Daniel said. "From today, you will never sleep under a bridge again. You'll stay here, eat 3 meals a day, and go to school like every other child." Tears filled Kofi's eyes. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Say thank you by staying the same," Daniel said warmly. "Keep making her laugh." Kofi wiped his eyes and nodded quickly. "I will, sir. I promise." From her room upstairs, Mia saw them sitting together under the garden lights. Her father's arm rested gently on Kofi's shoulder. She smiled to herself. Her family was growing again. Days turned into weeks. Kofi began attending school with Mia's private tutor. He learned letters, numbers, and how to read short words. He was sharp, faster than anyone expected. At 4 o'clock every afternoon, after lessons, they played and danced in the garden. Mia could now move her arms freely and had started lifting herself a little every day. One afternoon, she managed to stand for a few seconds before falling back into her chair. Kofi jumped and cheered. "You did it, Mia! You stood!" Daniel, who was watching from a distance, ran toward them, his eyes wet. "You're getting stronger, sweetheart." Mia laughed through her tears. "Kofi said I could do anything if I laughed while I tried." Daniel looked at the boy with gratitude. "Then keep laughing," he said softly. But while happiness filled the Brooks mansion, whispers began outside. News spread through the city. The billionaire took in a street boy. Some called it charity. Others called it foolishness. Reporters began camping near the gates. One day, Daniel's business partners confronted him. "Daniel," one said sternly, "you're risking your name. That boy is a nobody. What if he steals? What if he embarrasses you?" Daniel looked up calmly. "That boy gave my daughter her life back," he said. "If the price of kindness is my reputation, then so be it." The men exchanged nervous looks. Daniel stood, straightening his jacket. "I used to believe wealth made me powerful," he continued. "But I've learned something richer than gold, love." Then he walked out, leaving them in silence. That evening, the garden was quiet. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. Kofi danced slowly to a soft rhythm, moving like the wind. Mia clapped along, her eyes sparkling. "Wait," she said suddenly. "I want to try again." Kofi stopped, watching as she gripped the arms of her wheelchair. Her face tensed with effort. Her legs trembled. Then, slowly, she pushed herself up. This time, she stood taller than before. 1 second. 2. 3. "I'm standing!" she cried. Daniel ran to her, tears streaming. "You're doing it, my love!" Kofi jumped and spun in joy. "You're walking, Mia!" She took a shaky step. Then another. Then fell, but laughing all the way down. "I stood," she said, smiling through tears. "I really stood." Daniel knelt beside her, hugging her tight. "You're my miracle," he whispered. Kofi joined them, his smile wide and proud. In that moment, under the fading golden sky, 3 hearts beat as one, a father, a daughter, and a boy who had once been invisible. That night, Daniel stood by the window, watching the garden. The same garden that had once been silent now overflowed with laughter. He whispered softly to himself, Maybe this is what real wealth feels like." For the first time in years, he didn't think about business or numbers or meetings. He thought only of his daughter's laughter and a boy's kindness. And as the wind rustled the trees outside, Daniel smiled and whispered, "Thank you, Kofi." Somewhere outside, under the stars, Kofi slept peacefully, safe, warm, and loved. And the mansion that once echoed with silence now sang with joy, laughter, and life. The story of the Brooks mansion had become the talk of the city. Every newspaper, every radio station, every online post had one headline: Billionaire takes street boy into his home. Some people called it charity. Some called it madness. But for Daniel Brooks, it was either. It was gratitude and love. Inside those gates, beyond the whispers of the world, something beautiful was growing. A family. Mia was walking now. Not far, not fast, but walking. Her laughter had returned fully. Loud, wild, contagious. And Kofi, the boy who once danced on empty streets for coins, now had a home. He still danced every day, but now his audience was a little girl in a wheelchair who cheered louder than any crowd. Together, they turned sadness into joy, pain into laughter, and loneliness into love. One sunny morning, Kofi stood behind Mia as she took slow steps on the soft grass. He counted playfully. 1, 2, 3. Mia giggled, gripping her walker. Don't rush me, Kofi. He grinned. I'm not rushing you. I'm helping you become a champion. From the veranda, Daniel watched them quietly. His heart swelled with something he couldn't explain. It was pride, but also peace. For the first time since his wife's death, the mansion felt alive again. Outside the walls, the story spread faster. Cameras began appearing at the gates. Reporters stood in the sun, waiting for a glimpse. Mr. Brooks, can you tell us why you adopted a homeless child? Sir, what message are you sending? Daniel avoided them, but when a gentle-voiced journalist said, Sir, we want to tell people there's still kindness in this world. He paused. He turned and smiled faintly. All right. But tell them the truth. I didn't just take in a boy. I accepted a miracle. The next day, the reporters were allowed into the garden. Daniel sat beside Mia, who was dressed in a yellow dress that matched the sunlight. Kofi stood next to her, holding her hand tightly. The reporter crouched down and asked softly, Mia, who is this boy to you? Mia smiled proudly. He's my brother. Kofi froze for a second, surprised. Then he smiled too, that bright, unforgettable smile. And she's my sister, he said. The crowd of reporters chuckled softly. Flashbulbs popped. Then one of them turned to Daniel. Sir, how does it feel to bring him into your home? Daniel looked at both children and said quietly, When doctors failed and medicines didn't work, this boy gave my daughter something priceless, laughter. And through her laughter, she found strength. Through her strength, I found hope. So, you see, I didn't save him. He saved us. For a moment, even the reporters were silent. Some wiped their eyes. The story went everywhere: TV, radio, social media. People called Daniel a hero, but he didn't care about fame. All he cared about was the laughter that now echoed in his home. Not everyone approved, though. One morning, at a meeting downtown, Daniel's business partners confronted him. Daniel, one said, slamming a newspaper on the table. This is getting out of hand. You're becoming a public spectacle. Daniel said nothing. Another leaned forward. You're risking our company's reputation. That boy, he's from the streets. He could ruin everything. Daniel looked up slowly. That boy gave my daughter her life back. Daniel, this isn't about emotion. The man snapped. You're right, Daniel said, standing calmly. It's about humanity. He gathered his files, then paused at the door. I've spent years chasing money. But I finally learned something: money can't buy peace. And with that, he left the room. That evening, the mansion glowed with soft lights. Daniel had organized a small celebration, not for business, not for the press, but for love. Family, friends, and staff gathered in the garden. Music played softly. The air smelled of fresh flowers and roasted food. Then, as everyone watched, Mia stepped forward. She held Kofi's hand with one hand, and her cane with the other. Her legs trembled, but she smiled bravely. Step by step, she walked across the lawn. People gasped. Some clapped. Kofi shouted playfully, Ladies and gentlemen, the champion of the world! Laughter filled the garden. When Mia reached her father, Daniel dropped to his knees and hugged her tight. I'm proud of you, my love, he whispered. Then he turned to Kofi, eyes warm. And you, my son? Kofi blinked in disbelief. Son? Daniel smiled. Yes. My son. You've earned it. Tears flooded Kofi's eyes. Thank you, sir. Not sir, Daniel said softly. Dad? Kofi's voice broke. Thank you, Dad? The entire garden went quiet. Then, as if on cue, everyone began to clap. Under the stars they danced, a father, a daughter, and a boy who had once been invisible. Later that night, Kofi sat quietly on the garden steps. He looked up at the moon, his heart full but unsure what to say. Daniel joined him with 2 mugs of hot cocoa. You're quiet, he said, smiling. Kofi nodded. Just thinking. I used to sleep under the bridge. Now I have a bed. Sometimes I still wake up and can't believe it's real. Daniel looked at him with kind eyes. It's real, Kofi. You belong here. You brought light back into this house. Kofi smiled shyly. And you brought me home. They sat in silence, sipping cocoa, the soft hum of crickets around them. A month later, Daniel took both children to court. It was a simple ceremony. The judge smiled as Daniel signed the papers. With this, she said, you are officially his father. Kofi stared at the paper in disbelief. My name, it's Kofi Brooks now. Daniel nodded, smiling proudly. Mia jumped in excitement. I told you! You're my brother forever! Kofi laughed through tears. Forever. The courtroom clapped, and even the judge wiped her eyes. Months passed. The garden, once quiet and lonely, was now full of children. Daniel had built a small school behind the mansion, the Laughter Foundation. It was a home for street kids, a place where they could eat, learn, and dance. Every morning, Kofi taught them moves under the big mango tree. Dance with your heart, he'd shout. And the children laughed and spun, just like he once did when he was hungry. Mia helped with reading lessons and therapy sessions. Daniel watched from the veranda, his heart full of pride. You did it, he told Kofi one evening. Kofi smiled. No, Dad. We did it. That night, as the sun set, Daniel stood alone in the garden. Children's laughter echoed through the air, bright, strong, alive. He closed his eyes and whispered. I thought I had everything, but I had nothing until I met that boy. He looked toward the mango tree, where Kofi was dancing with the children and Mia was clapping joyfully. The same laughter that once saved his daughter now saved countless others. And for the first time, Daniel truly understood what wealth meant. It wasn't the cars, or the business, or the houses. It was this. The sound of laughter. The gift of love. Sometimes, miracles don't come from doctors or money. Sometimes they come from a small act of love. A dance. A smile. A laugh that changes everything. If this story touched your heart, tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Love, Lust, and Fortune. For more stories that remind us all that love is the greatest gift of all.